Ultimately, I said I wanted to be a giraffe. Back in Uganda, where I come from, in the savannah, the giraffes feed on basically the highest leaves. So they always have a very good vantage point across the savannah. And so because they can see so far, anytime danger is approaching, they're always the first to run and take action. And so they're sort of like the visionaries of the savannah to protect it from the predators. So I just thought, if anything, I want to be the person who sees a vision and translates that vision into an action point for people around me to either run towards a good thing or escape a bad thing.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Unmuted Moments. I'm your host, Ahis, and today I am joined by Kalule Guwatudde. He's a Ugandan-born entrepreneur, currently based in Boston, and he's an alum of the University of Notre Dame. He's worked at McKinsey, which is a management consultant firm, T Associates, which is a private equity firm, and now he's the CEO and founder of Bora Bond. We're going to hear more about this later in the show, but it's a platform helping the African diaspora invest directly in African government bonds. So on today's show, we'll talk about his journey from Uganda to the States and what it means to find your voice as an entrepreneur. Kalule, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Let's start in Uganda. What was childhood like for you, and how did your environment growing up shape your voice?
So the most defining moment for me was that I went to boarding school when I was 5 years old.
Wow.
And that is very typical in the Ugandan setting. I went to a really tough boarding school. It was all boys, and you couldn't take any money. And you
No pocket money?
Nah, there's nothing like a cafeteria on campus. There's no way you could go buy anything with money. So money was pretty much useless. And it was basically contraband. You couldn't bring any outside edibles or food from home. So it was always like what they give you at school is what you're supposed to eat and live by. So you tried to create this sort of like uniformity across everybody. So you could have a good learning environment and make lifelong connections. Several years later, I'm still connected to everybody that I went to primary school with for that 7 years in boarding school, right? And so I'd say it shaped me a lot because it gave me a different outlook on life, right? For example, because money was illegal, we had to find a way to trade. And every morning, we used to get a bun, like a breakfast, like the small bread. I don't know if you guys call it a bun in Nigeria. So we used to get that one every morning at breakfast. That was the most valuable thing. It became like currency. So anytime you need to make a trade, you get a trade using that bread. So for example, Ronaldo was like very big back in the day. And so if you wanted to buy a pull out of Ronaldo full page from the newspaper, because every day those newspapers that are brought to school, like maybe 1 or 2 copies, and so people would cut out the copies of Ronaldo or like wherever, Beckham, wherever, and then sell them. It would be coated in bread. It became the perfect currency. So
Right.
I think from a very young age, just helped me have a different perspective on life and be able to thrive in very different environments, because I don't think you find very many 5-year-olds who are that independent like I was. So boarding school at 5 years old, went through probably one of the toughest schools in Uganda. And then around 17, I left for high school, different country. And then coming to the US again, 20 something, like I was still new country, knew everything. But I feel like it all began my boarding experience in Uganda, because it's sort of like toughened me up for the world.
I hear stories like that, similar stories like this, which some describe sometimes as like hazing. Then you have to sort of learn how to speak up for yourself and defend yourself. And it sounds like a lot of people who have that experience, like that's something that can really shape you early on. But just still staying on the boarding school, just in terms of voice, was there any moment or anything that comes to mind where you realize what power you have in your voice to maybe influence people or even just stand up for yourself? Is there anything like that that comes to mind?
I would say not necessarily in boarding school.
Yeah.
However, when I got to secondary school in Uganda, I went to a very good school. I don't know if you know Makerere University or had.
Oh, yes, I've heard of it.
So my mom worked at Makerere University. She's been working there for a very long time. When I was born, she was working there. I went to Makerere University's secondary school, so to say. And so because it was a good school, we had very good teachers. And my experience was that towards a national examination period, kids from other high schools used to come to my high school to ask for our notes because we had better notes. We had a bunch of kids coming to my school asking for notes because they didn't have as many teachers were as good as the teachers that we had, right? And so I remember this one time, this kid walked up to me to ask if I could give him access to my physics notes. I was just sitting next to the gate. He had to be the security personnel to like walk him out because they couldn't let him in. For me, that was a moment of realizing the privilege that I had as being empathetic and putting myself in the shoes of the other kid. What if I had been that other kid and really want to succeed and going out of my way to go to this school, talk to strangers, trying to find good notes and prepare for my exam, but I cannot, right? So I think that experience ignited something in me. So after my national exam, in Uganda, people throw away their notes because they're celebrating, they're excited, like everything's done. I collected everybody's books, identified the smartest kids in class who had very good notes, and I collected those notes. I created this web platform, more like a wiki. I created a wiki that had other subjects for high school, and I posted most of those notes online. It was freely available to any Ugandan student. That experience ignited me to do something that benefits other people. That's how my voice started, because I've always wanted to not just think about myself, but also be empathetic and think about things that could benefit other people because of my privilege.
I like that. In this show, I talk a lot about voice. But a lot of times when I think about voice, I'm thinking about my voice. But this is a very good perspective too. It's like, how can I use my voice to help other people who may not have a voice too? This is very important because it's easy to focus on yourself. Part of the goal of this show is to help people advocate for themselves, whether it comes to promotion, going for an interview, or anything major like that. I like this perspective of using the voice from the perspective of other people who may not have the voice. And that's one way you find your voice too. So I really like the stories. What was the reception from the kids who may be looking for notes like this? What was the reception, or what was some of the feedback you got?
So unfortunately, it wasn't like I could track who the visitors were because I made everything free, and then we didn't have a lot of like good technology to like, track users. But I think people noticed, and because of that, someone nominated me to apply to the African Leadership Academy. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's essentially a high school that identifies a top 100 students from across the continent, brings them together for a 2-year pre-university program. So they do their A-levels and then prepares them for college, while at the same time teaching them more about entrepreneurial leadership and African studies. And the vision for ALA was to create a generation of African leaders who bring about positive change on the continent. Because of my work, I got nominated to apply to the African Leadership Academy, even if I wasn't doing the project to really get any specific benefit. I was able to get that nomination. I was able to get into ALA, which ultimately changed my life a lot for the better.
Oh, that's awesome. Let's talk about ALA then. So it's a 2-year program. And as you mentioned, sounds like it's very, very selective. Of those 100 students, do they try to make sure everyone is not from Southern Africa or from West Africa? Do they do that at all?
I think this is my experience.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
This might not be what the actual metrics are, but I found that they tried to do that as much as they could.
Okay.
But also keeping in mind that some countries are definitely going to be overrepresented. So, for example, in Nigeria, 1 out of every 5 Africans is Nigerian.
I would expect more than a Gambia, for example.
Exactly.
Nothing against Gambia, but this is a small example of a smaller country.
Exactly. My roommate as a first year was from the Gambia and Senegal.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So that's good that they have representation like that. And also, for a lot of us, myself included, I didn't get exposed to, I grew up in Nigeria. I live in the same town, actually, all my life in Nigeria until I came to the States. I went to primary school, secondary school, everything then. So I didn't get exposed to people from different countries until I moved to the States. It sounds like you already had that type of experience, even in Africa during those 2 years at ALA. So what are some, if the focus of ALA is leadership and entrepreneurship, right? Sounds like the pillars of the program had a very meaningful impact on your life. Any examples of times where any one of those sort of impactful moments happened to you that you learned something new about yourself or just about maybe the continent?
I think one thing ALA does so well is to teach you how to find your own journey
Mm.
and how you can use that to better the continent, right? But I remember from the interviews, they tried to make sure they got a particular kind of candidate. For my final round interview, one of the questions I got was, imagine you're an animal. Which animal would you be and why, right? And I found it very interesting because it made me think about not just an animal, but the personality or
Yeah.
kind of life for myself, right? Ultimately, I said I wanted to be a giraffe
A giraffe. Okay. That's a good one. And
because,
I guess what was you thinking behind choosing giraffe?
so back where I come from in the savannah, the giraffes feed on the highest leaves. They always have a very good vantage point across the savannah because they can see so far. Anytime danger is approaching, they're always the first to take action. They're sort of like the visionaries of the savannah to protect it
I
from the
like that
predator.
angle.
Yeah, I want to be the person who sees a vision and translates that vision into an action point for people around me to run towards a good thing or escape a bad thing.
That's a good one. I like that. I didn't even know if you would ask me that question today, I would have to think about it. I don't think anything comes to mind immediately. I'd say I feel like the elephant. Actually, if I were
Why?
to answer that question right now, I'd say an elephant.
Why?
And
Why?
why an elephant? Yes. So I think it's a high impact, low ego. If you think about the animals of the wild, nobody bothers the elephant. It's big enough where you could do damage to things, but it just does its own thing. It doesn't bother anybody and nobody bothers it. So I guess I kind of see myself like that. For those of us who are blessed to have privilege, you should be humble. I hope I come across as being humble too. It's not about what you see. Somebody could be very talented, be very privileged, but I don't have to flaunt it. I just
Yeah.
feel like elephants have a lot of energy. They have a lot of power, but they just go on their way, do their thing over there. Nobody bothers them. I think I'll choose an elephant if I had to choose.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome. And most times you realize that you choose an animal that sort of like represents your principles
Yeah.
or your values. So that kind of learning experience opens you up to not only learn about yourself, but also how you can be of service to the world around you. That exemplifies the African Leadership Academy education in a nutshell.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Let's fast forward to you moving. You did LA, and then you moved to South Bend, Indiana, right? That's where Notre Dame is located. How was that transition, or how was that move for you? Did you, I don't want to say instantly, felt like you just got right into the swing of things, or did you feel like you didn't belong initially and had to do some work to be part of that environment? Or what was that transition for you, moving from Uganda to, or moving from Africa to America for you like?
So this is my experience. First of all, in Uganda, the mindset I was in was sort of like a tribal mindset. You think across tribal lines. I moved to South Africa and that mindset changed. I was Ugandan. It didn't matter what tribe I was from. I was just Ugandan. Then I came to the US. It didn't matter that I was Ugandan. I was now African and I was black and an immigrant. When I moved to South Africa, I was in a very protected environment. I was in a boarding school. So I wasn't exposed to a lot of things the average foreigner will be exposed to in South Africa. But when I came to the US, everything just hit me because I had to take on the black experience in America. And at the same time, I had to take on the immigrant experience in America and the South African experience in America. Having those three subsections is a lot of work, right? So as an African, your accent is always going to be a point of friction, whether that's you putting your hand up in the class to contribute something in class, in that it's like you're always meant to feel smaller just because your accent is different and people are always asking you to repeat yourself. So it's easy to just put your head down and avoid putting yourself out there. And at the same time, being an immigrant, it's always at the back of your mind for moving to the US. Like the immigration system is not very forgiving, especially right now with the administration. It's a hostile environment for immigrants. At the same time, you're also black. You also take on the black experience. Was I
Everything that
felt
comes
like
through that experience.
exactly right. So just sort of navigating those three things was such a challenge. And so I wouldn't say it was an easy thing, but it was easy to get lost in all of those worries, right?
I like your framing, separating them out into three different buckets. Like there's the immigrant side of things. There's being an African. There's also being black. I've never like thought about it in those three different layers of experience. The African identity of being an African who recently moved to the state. I think that's the one that I carried the most of all those three that you just mentioned. The goal here is for people who are early in the journey of moving here, whether in college or in the professional life, they can sort of get some ideas of some things that could help them. So I don't know if you remember anything or some things that sort of helped you in your transition to being comfortable here and confident in raising your hand in the class, or if you're in a meeting, to share your voice or share your opinion about something that you may have a strong idea or opinion about.
So I had a very non-traditional college experience
Okay.
because after my sophomore year, I decided to take time off school, go back to Uganda for 2 years. I worked on a startup, built a team to over 10 people, and by the time I left, our revenue is about $100,000.
So you moved primarily to go start up this business. Is that why you moved back home?
Correct. And then after 2 years, I felt like I had the core team in place and decided to come back to school. The main reason I did that was because I didn't think I was getting a good college experience because I felt like college was all about self-discovery.
Mm-hmm.
I always questioned things in my class and how that helped me on the journey to self-discovery. I always felt like I'll discover myself more in a business environment. The initial goal was to finish my Notre Dame degree, pack up my bags, go back to Uganda, launch a business. But in hindsight, that was a very risky move. So I decided to de-risk that. For me, that meant taking time off school after my sophomore year because I'm thinking that push comes to shove, everything goes really bad. I just get to go back to Notre Dame, right?
Yeah.
So I think for me, that was the most sort of like de-risked path for me to go on a journey of self-discovery. And looking back, I don't regret a day that I took time off school. I know my then classmates were already 2 years ahead of me, but I feel like on a journey of self-discovery that I had embarked on, I had learned so much more about myself than I would ever have gotten from any college class on campus.
That's very interesting. So you go to Uganda for 2 years, you come back. What did you feel was different when you came back this time compared to the first time you came? What did you feel was different in the way you handled yourself or the way you did things around campus?
I think before I left, I quite didn't know what I wanted to do. So as a freshman, I did engineering. I hated it. As a sophomore, I did accounting. It was so boring. I just couldn't see myself doing it. And so having that experience made me more intentional about solving for the things that truly mattered for me. Coming back as a junior, I decided to essentially do the easiest major on campus.
Which was?
It's called management consulting.
It's actually a major?
That's something I get every time I talk about it. All the athletes did management consulting. I had a very good time doing that major as a junior.
Wow, I didn't know that. I thought you were going to say economics.
I graduated a double major in economics and consulting.
So moved from Uganda, did Notre Dame, got your double major, your 2 degrees, and then worked at places like McKinsey, T Associates. But now you have your own thing. So let's spend some time on that. Why don't you introduce us to Bora Bonds, what the mission is, and what problem you are trying to address with your company?
Yeah, absolutely. Bora Bond is a platform to enable African diaspora people invest in African government bonds through a single account. And so when you look at the US 20-year bond, yield is about 4.5%, 5%. But when you look at different African bonds, the yield is multiples of that. For example, in Uganda, the current 20-year bond is about 15%. So again, it's like 3 times what you'd get. And so we're trying to create access to those bonds for diaspora. I had begun investing in Ugandan government bonds, and the very first bond I bought had a coupon of 17.5%. It was a 20-year bond. And then the bond I bought right after that, after a few months, was like 18.5%. And thereafter, I bought bonds like 16%, lowest be 15%, right? So 2 years ago, I wanted to diversify my holdings and buy some Kenyan bonds, Tanzanian bonds, Ghanaian bonds, and I just couldn't. There's literally no access at all. So in the US, I went to Fidelity, into the portal, into Charles Schwab, and when you search African government bonds, here's the thing. Nothing shows up on the platform. You have to call the International Trade Desk to get access. Only one African country, as of last year, was green, basically had to be traded by both Fidelity and Charles Schwab. I'll let you take a guess what that country is.
South Africa?
Exactly.
Okay.
But here's a catch. The minimum trade amount for each trade is 100,000.
Wow. Not a lot of people have 100K just laying around and say, oh, I want to buy a bond
Essentially.
with 100K.
Essentially, you find that as a retail investor, it's impossible for you to invest in an African government bond if you're not from that country. Even if you're from that country, you have to be physically present most times for you to create a bank account and create a CSD account so you can invest. That is what we're trying to make it easier. So that's our vision right now, right? So what we're envisioning is that we want to activate the African diaspora market to take up African government bonds as an alternative asset class. And again, be comfortable with asset class because it's very good, it's very stable. And then later on, over the next few years, we want to enable African jurisdictions, so basically anything non-state, so cities, districts, regions, provinces, towns, to be able to underwrite for them to be able to issue their own bonds. And we understand that there may not be local capacity to buy those bonds, but we want to sort of like make them diaspora focused. So the diaspora, these bonds are targeted towards the diaspora because the African diaspora has like a lot of economic potential because right now they send about $100 billion back home to Africa. And that's just through the formal channels. But if you factor in the informal channels, for example, I'm going back to Uganda, I buy 2-3 iPhones, get to Uganda, resell them. Or I'm going to Uganda, I can take up to anything less than $10,000. I take cash on me.
Cash, yeah.
There's no need to account for that, right? So if you factor in the informal channels like those, you find that we send home like at least $200 billion on the continent every single year. So that just goes to say that disposable income, we just want to provide the bonds as an alternate asset class because at the end of it all, this is how we're going to create an efficient capital flow from the diaspora that would finance the continent. So that's our long-term vision.
So in terms of education, how are you thinking about helping people understand, one, the opportunities that are available, and two, why it makes sense? How are you trying to educate people about it?
So I think number one is providing access because traditionally speaking, access has been the biggest issue. And we are breaking down the barriers to provide access. Starting out, we would have very low minimums, even not having a minimum investment amount, so that someone could easily start with a low amount. My story was that I invested the first amount, got comfortable as a class and double down. So we want to provide the same experience. So very low minimums, get started, get comfortable, then you can grow your investment over time.
There's a vision here where it'll be a Charles Schwab or any sort of the brokerage account where it'll be very frictionless in terms of like if I want to invest in a Ugandan bond or a South African bond, I don't need to call anybody. I just go in a portal and do it. Is that the vision?
Exactly. That is a vision.
Just from a personal standpoint, when you've lived in the States for a while, people call you up for different types of investment opportunities at home. And one big one is like land, like buying land. It's very common to buy land back at home. It's always been interesting for me because in Nigeria, the values of land do appreciate very quickly. Like the land that's bought, I don't know, just making this up, $10 today, in 5 years, it's like $20, $30. But my problem has always been currency risk. On paper, on nominal basis, people say, oh yeah, this thing is doubled in price. I'm like, yes, in local currency terms. They're like, this thing used to be 1 million naira, now it's 2 million naira. Oh, it's gone up. I'm like, sure. But the naira used to be, like, the naira has probably deteriorated even worse than the increase. All this makes me worry because of the currency side of things. How are you thinking about that in this context?
That is a very good question. Most people might think that default risk is the biggest risk, which is actually, it's not. African governments have come a long way from that. Defaults are very rare. Currency risk is the biggest challenge with African government bonds. We have like a 3-tiered strategy again. So number one is just diversify, diversify, diversify. So I know that the Naira has taken a beating, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at other countries like Uganda, they have a very stable currency. So you want to make sure that you spread out your investment across different African countries, reduce that currency risk. That's number one. And then number two, we think about Euro bonds for select countries. So let's say Nigeria right now, it's probably not the best idea to touch bonds. Probably better off doing a Euro bond, which is basically, again, Nigeria bond, but denominated in dollars per se. So you can hedge some of
so
that.
those exist? So I could buy a Nigerian government bond that's denominated in dollar? Those already exist? Is that some kind of financial intermediary, or actually the Nigerian government issues those?
The Nigerian government issues.
Oh, okay.
And there's a few African countries that issue those as well. For example, Kenya, Ethiopia, Cameroon, South Africa, they all have Euro bonds, right? So that's a second strategy. And then the third strategy is around something called tax loss harvesting. Basically, in the US, anytime you have a capital loss, you could use that capital loss to reduce either your capital gains taxes due elsewhere. You could use it to reduce your ordinary income taxes.
That's awesome. This is very interesting to the extent that some of this investment can help build those things. They need those infrastructure. I'm really excited for you. I'm really excited for your company. I will be following you guys and seeing what you guys are up to. And who knows, maybe we might bring you back here to let us know what's going on again later in the future. So just sort of going on the personal side, I imagine this journey is like being a founder, leading your own thing, especially going into an area that's totally new. I imagine it's a lot to go through and a lot of challenges. In your journey so far, what are some of the internal challenges that you've had to go through? What are imposter syndrome, burnout, self-doubt? What are some of the things you've had to go through, and what kind of tools do you use to deal with them?
So I think for me, it's been around, I'd say, maybe let me just call this founder loneliness, in that doing a startup in a very regulated industry, and you're doing it to essentially incorporate a region that has people have so much bias against, you'd face rejections from so many different places. Think about any big banks, think about any large broker dealers who could provide access to the continent. I have contacted them. The number of rejections I've got is crazy, right? And so essentially finding the right player to believe in the dream when you're starting out is the hardest. And because you get so many rejections, I don't think there's anybody else that understands exactly what you're going through unless they're a founder. They don't know your situation because you're going to bed thinking about this. And every rejection is personal because you left your job and you're trying to create a path where there's no path, right? And so just that, it's really hard, but I'll say that's been the biggest issue.
I admire people who find that conviction in an idea strong enough to like go on their own path, because at least where I'm at in life or where I've been in life, it's been helpful for me to have some structure. And obviously this entrepreneurial route there's no structure. You create your own structure. That's a point, right? That's why it's a new idea. Like you have to go create the structure where structure don't exist. So as you sort of talk about this sort of founder loneliness and it's been an experience where it might be hard for someone else to understand. How do you keep going? What helps you shake it off and keep going?
I see the vision, and in my head, it's so real. I can actually touch it, right? Because my journey has been, I have invested in Uganda government bonds. Like my money is where my mouth is. And I know this is a very good asset class, right? And I imagine a future in which there is seamless access to all African government bonds. And then I imagine a future in which the capital markets and the capital flow actually helps to benefit the continent. I look at that vision and I feel like it is too important for me to give up.
I like that. It just reminds me of the giraffe. You remember the giraffe? You described the animal and how it's visionary, how you can see forward. You can see those things that maybe people who are down here having difficulty to see, but you're tall enough, figuratively. You can see far and see the vision.
One thing I'd add is that I don't know if you've read The Alchemist.
Yes, I have read The Alchemist.
You know how they say that the universe conspires to make your dreams come true as long as your intention and you work towards that dream. I've got to internalize that the universe has conspired to make everything we believe come true. Us getting the licensing in the US and that custodian bank to come on board. Starting out, if I knew how hard it was going to be, I'll probably I don't know if I'll do it. But like I just did it. And it's funny, like, we're going to market. And so that's been a very big thing. I feel like the universe is conspiring to make our dreams come true.
Awesome. Yeah, I think, it's that conviction. And I guess it's easier when you can, as you said, you can almost touch it. When you can see it, that conviction keeps you going. And a lot of times it falls on you to be able to convince people, influence people to see it the way you're seeing it. So as we wrap up, I have one final question for any young international students or young professionals who may have a big idea, like starting a business, but are having self-doubts and don't feel confident enough to pursue that conviction, no matter how strong it is. What's one advice that you have for such a person?
I'd say there's two kinds of people in this case. There's a person who has an idea, hasn't yet begun doing it, and there's a person who's already doing something. For the person already doing something, don't take advice from anyone who hasn't done what you're doing. Because no one can and no one should tell you where you alone must go. Because most advice people will just be projecting from their own point of view, from their own failures, from their own limitations. Don't listen to those. And then for people who are thinking about doing something but haven't yet started, I would say I always find it very helpful to begin with an end goal in mind. So think about your life 10, 15, 20 years from now. What does that look like? Are you happy with that? Are you satisfied? If not, then let's connect the dots. What can you do today to make sure that 10 years, 20 years down the road, you're living the life you always wanted to live? Because I believe there's two types of pain in the world. There's a pain of discipline and pain of regret. And I find that as much as the pain of discipline is hard, I'm really scared of the pain of regret, because at that point, the ship has sailed, you can't do anything anymore. Right. Whatever you do today compounds over time. You're a finance guy. You know how whatever activities you're doing today, in 5, 10 years from now, they're going to compound into something even bigger. So you got to watch what you decide to do today.
I really appreciate your time this afternoon. I'm really excited for you and what you guys are trying to build. I think we need more things like this to help us connect to our various countries of origin, that's Uganda, Nigeria in my case. And hopefully, again, as you mentioned, we can do something tangible, like a power plant. I think it's cool if it's a very tangible thing, like investing in a football stadium or a train station. I think that's cool. If we can get to a point where we can directly invest in a very specific thing that we're passionate about. Excited to keep following you guys and see what the future holds. Thank you for your time. And to everyone listening, thank you for spending time with us today. If you enjoyed the show, please don't forget to rate us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen, because it really helps others to discover the show. Thanks again for joining. I am Mahis. Next time, stay unmuted.